Hey everyone, here today to talk about the turning points of World War II. So let's go ahead and get started. Here you can see access control of the parts of the world that they control in around 1942, which is kind of the height of their power. So you can see the Germans have much of Europe, North Africa, parts of Scandinavia. The Japanese over here have obviously parts of China here, Southeast Asia, Indonesia, obviously smaller islands in the Pacific that we can't see. So anyways, today we're going to focus on the turning points. We're going to talk about them real briefly here. I have different turning points than probably many other teachers do. The first one being Pearl Harbor, which might sound a little arrogant, but from my point of view, from what I've read about Pearl Harbor and or World War II and what I know, the minute the Americans get involved in World War II, it's all over but the crying. The Americans have a huge advantage. They have the biggest economy. They can mass produce, tons and tons of weapons. They're isolated geographically by the Atlantic Ocean and the Pacific. They can't be attacked. Their cities can't be bombed. So the Americans can just sit there protected and mass produce weapons and prepare their troops. And, that's just a huge advantage. And eventually, there's no way the Germans can defeat the Americans. It's just impossible. So the Pearl Harbor, American getting involved in World War II, in my opinion, is incredibly important. But then, a bunch of important battles. You have Midway, Stalingrad, and then D-Day. So we'll talk about each one of these real briefly. I'm sure we have a decent idea of what these already are in the first place. So we'll start with the Battle of Midway. So Midway takes place June 1942. So once again, not too long after Pearl Harbor. Remember, Pearl Harbor happened in December. Oops, computer's having like a brain freeze here. Pearl Harbor happened in December 1941, so not even a full year after the Americans in the war. The Americans land just a hammer blow on the Japanese, and that happens at the Battle of Midway. The Japanese have a very aggressive plan to attack Midway, which is a series of islands in the Pacific, midway between Asia and the Americas. What the Japanese don't know is that the Americans have cracked the secret Japanese code. And so back in World War II, they had to communicate using radio waves, obviously, and you didn't want your enemy to know what you were saying, so you would have kind of like encrypted codes or code words. So for instance, you would say, the chicken's in the pot. Cook it, and that would mean something. Your enemies wouldn't know what it meant, but, you would. And so the Americans basically figure out what the code is. The Americans hear the Japanese talking about Midway Island. The Americans figure out the Japanese are coming after them at Midway Island. And the Americans are able to set basically a trap. The Japanese think they're going to be attacking these islands almost unprepared. And they think it's going to be nice and easy. What they don't know is that the Americans are just waiting for them and attack them. The Americans are just incredibly, I don't want to say lucky, but it goes very well for the Americans. The Americans sink the Japanese 4 best aircraft carriers along with all their best pilots. And, Japan does not have the industrial capacity that the Americans do. And so when the Japanese lose aircraft carriers like this, they can't just replace them like the Americans can. And so once the Japanese lose their aircraft carriers, their most important offensive weapons, it basically means the Japanese will be playing defense for the rest of the war. They're not going to have the strength to continue staying on the offensive. They're simply going to try to hold on to what they have. And slowly but surely, the Americans will start taking back the islands that they've taken over. Okay. So anyways, here are some pictures of the Battle of Midway. You can see American aircraft planes from aircraft carriers flying here. You can see that they have like their little bomb here. You can see the end of the bomb right there, dive bombers and stuff like that. There you can see the bomb there, or torpedo, whatever it is. And here you can see the Japanese aircraft carriers. The Japanese aircraft carriers were slightly different than the American aircraft carriers. The Japanese aircraft carriers, the deck was made of wood, which I guess in retrospect is probably a bad idea because wood burns quite easily. Whereas the American aircraft carriers, the deck was made of steel, which obviously is a lot better. So here you see a Japanese aircraft carrier trying to evade American dive bombers. Here's the Hiryu trying to escape. It does not. Here's the American carrier Yorktown trying to get away from Japanese dive bombers and torpedoes. The Yorktown unfortunately sinks eventually. And here you can see they're shooting all these black clouds are actually pieces of metal and stuff that they throw into the air to try to slow down enemy planes and stuff. So anyways, the Midway battle, like I said, turns the tide for the Americans in the Pacific. Probably the most important battle in World War II, however, though, is fought between the Germans and the Soviets. The Battle of Stalingrad is just a slobber knocker of a fight. It's probably the largest battle, the most bloody battle in human history. And the reason this battle is important is this is the battle where the German advance is finally stopped. Okay, the Soviets are able to stop them. And from this point on, the Soviets will slowly begin pushing the Germans back into Germany. Okay, so up until this point, the Germans are doing very, very well. After this point, the Soviets kind of catch their breath, get organized, and start pushing them back. But the casualties are simply astounding. They're just mind-boggling. This is just one battle. And you consider, like, our wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, where in 10 years of fighting Iraq and Afghanistan, we lost roughly 10,000 troops dead. And you just compare those numbers to just one battle, and it's just unreal. And the Soviets, like I said, they obviously suffer more casualties. There's a statistic out there that said that the average Soviet private who served at the Battle of Stalingrad had a life expectancy of shorter than 24 hours. So the average Soviet soldier lasted less than a day in the Battle of Stalingrad. It was just an absolute meat grinder. Soviet boys who were born in 1923 had a 80% death rate because they didn't make it out of the war. So, like I said, the Soviets sacrificed a lot, but they held on in this battle, and then as a result, were able to push the Germans back here. So here you see a great map here. Here you see 1941, the Germans are pushing into the Soviet Union. 1942, they're still pushing into the Soviet Union. But then by 1943, the Battle of Stalingrad is won, and then the Germans are able to start pushing, or the Germans start getting pushed back by the Soviets, excuse me. And then by 1944, the Soviets are at their doorstep. Here you can see the Americans have invaded France on D-Day. The Americans are also pushing north here in Italy. And so here you see, by 1944, Hitler's actually fighting what I guess you could consider a three-front war. He's fighting in the south, he's fighting in the west, he's fighting in the east, and he's going to get smushed. Okay? So basically, D-Day is the other major turning point in the war. For much of the war, Germany is fighting that one-front war. I mean, France gets knocked out of the war in 1940, and write that down. So France gets knocked out in 1940, and it takes until 1944 for the British, the Americans, and the French to open up that second front on the Germans. Okay, and so on June 6, 1944, the Americans, the British, and the good old Canadians launch a massive, massive invasion of the beaches on Normandy, which are in France. There are 5 beaches that are targeted. The Americans take the toughest ones, Omaha and Utah. They suffer massive, massive casualties. I'm sure for those of you that's seen Saving Private Ryan, you kind of know what I'm talking about here. It was a very tough job for our soldiers. Our soldiers had to, basically get on these ships here. These ships are called Higgins ships. And you would go to the beach, and this door would fly down. And then once it flew down, the Germans would then obviously be shooting machine gun fire and stuff in there. And, a lot of American soldiers were slaughtered as a result. But the Americans had so many soldiers that the Germans couldn't shoot them all. And eventually the Americans are able to overwhelm the Germans at Omaha and Utah Beach. Okay, and once again, the real importance of this battle is that it opens up that second front, and Hitler's not going to be strong enough to fight the Soviets on the east and the Americans on the west. Okay, so eventually the Americans are able to push the Germans out of France. In addition to charging the beaches, the Americans launched or dropped tens of thousands of paratroopers behind German lines to start the fighting as well. The miniseries Band of Brothers talks about this. Talks about these guys. It's probably the greatest war movie's ever done, so if you want to check it out, go ahead. Here's another picture of D-Day, our troops walking on the beaches and stuff like that. And today, the Americans actually have a cemetery that was given to us by the French and is actually considered American territory. And all of our troops are buried there, that died there, and their graves face the United States of America today. Which is kind of nice. Kind of an interesting story is Teddy Roosevelt's son, Teddy Jr., actually died during the D-Day invasion. It was kind of funny, actually. He actually participated in the beach invasion part of it, and he was so old that he needed a cane to walk, and he didn't have a weapon, didn't have a helmet on. He survived. Excuse me, the bell's ringing. He survived the beach invasion part of it. Only to die of a heart attack a couple, like a month later. So, anyways, basically, here's kind of the scoop here. Because of Stalingrad, the German advance is stopped. Because of D-Day, a second front is open. And the bottom line is, Hitler and Germany are not going to be able to stop that. So once again, you've got the 30 million man army pushing from the east. You got the massive French, British, and American armies pushing from the west. You have the American armies pushing from the south. You got American bombers bombing the crap out of Germany from Great Britain, as well as the British bombers. And Germany just gets absolutely obliterated by these three things or so. So anyways, that's all I have for you today. Hope you enjoyed it.